Hey guys, welcome to the Self-Empowerment Workshops Part 2. So it's important that when you're watching these, they flow on from each other. So it's good that you actually do the first two or attend the first two workshops before reviewing the next one because they build upon each other and the concepts and ideas are important to understand in the sequence and in flow. And flow is really important. And in fact, flow is actually the next theme moving into the circle that we're going to be looking at. But before we do, just a bit of a recap on the first of the workshops, which is around the square in the center of the Philosopher's Stone, and how that relates to our fate. Now, in our fate, specifically our DNA and the four elements. Now, DNA in respect of bloodlines and where we came from. So, inheriting those bloodlines and that DNA points us back to other parts of our history and our family's history and our DNA line where we may have to answer to certain aspects of our ancestral events and ancestral activities that put us where we are at the moment. For example, I use the idea of my Scottish DNA as being referenced back to when the Campbells were in Scotland and how there was quite a lot of conflict. And also, another part of my DNA specifically is my Danish DNA. So going back to the Vikings. So it's quite a broad mix, and understanding yourself and understanding your fate is important to actually trace your family history back to those different times because as we come into this body, we're carrying on those bloodlines. Now, in respect of the giants that we were looking at in the first series, how does that tie in? Well, those bloodlines of those giants are still with us today. And keep in mind that the bloodlines trace through to kingship and to royalty in respect of the fact that a lot of those giants were actually seen as gods. So it's really important again that you look at it from the aspect of that. There were some other manipulative aspects on the side of those giants as well. And again, some of those bloodlines could be seen as coming through as well. So in session 2, we're looking at the circle, and the circle represents the water element. So the first one was the earth element. Now the water element in this case, and looking at our fate again, is our astrological chart. So as above, so below. So as above, we're looking at the astrological influence, and below, we're looking at the earth influence. So they're coming together to form this series of challenges that we have within our fate, our karmic, coming together with that. So your astrological chart is really important, and essentially, for those who don't really understand or believe in astrology, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that just as the moon influences the tides, you could see how the moon could influence water, and water relating within our body to 85% of our makeup means that just as the tides are being pulled as the water waxes or the moon pulls and waxes and wanes, so we have this pull of fluid in our bodies. It's very subtle. And I will say that where DNA is more broad and more blatant and obviously more physical, the spiritual aspects of this course are a lot more subtle. So although the influence is very prominent, to the unaware, they are being pulled in all sorts of directions by all these different magnetic pulls of the planets and pushes of the planets. And essentially, this is governed by your astrological chart in regards to how you were when you were born, where the planets were in relation to the houses is really important. Now, the circle is also related to the feminine, so the square is related to the male, and the circle is related to the feminine aspects. And I say female, I don't want to be derogatory where you just added "fee" on the other end. But when we looked at the first session, it was around Hermes Trismegistus and the 7 principles. And you'll remember that the last principle, or second last principle, was actually all is gender. So this is looking at the female aspect. The circle is also related to flow, and flow is really important. Now, circles, as in cycles, is a play on those words. So cycles as in cyclic, everything goes in cycles. It's related to our right brain. Now remember before we said that the left brain is the logic, it's the mathematical side of our thinking, whereas the right brain is the creative artistic side, and that's the feminine aspect, which is also related to creativity. As in the cycle, it's related to regeneration, or in a higher sense, reincarnation. So this may be something that again you have trouble accepting, but it's something that was accepted, as I mentioned before in the previous workshop, up until about the 325 AD in the introduction of the New Testament, where reincarnation prior to that was popularly believed, and then it was omitted from those later doctrines, and in the hope that people would be manipulated into thinking that you only live once. So yeah, really important about that. And it's also related to the egoic causal shell, and we'll look at that as we go along. So the egoic causal shell is really about the ego, and it's about how it's encapsulated within a shell or an outer protective layer, if you like. So we'll look at that in more detail as we go along. Now, in regards to astrology, keep in mind that in the days of alchemy, astrology morphed into astronomy. So it came from being a how would you say, a internal influence from an external influence, and being more subtle, to just being pretty pictures in the sky and constellations here, there, and everywhere, and planets here, there, and everywhere. And effectively, that was where it sort of got off. So the correlation between astrology and astronomy has sort of somewhat been lost. And a lot of astronomers will just again look at the sky chart and go, well, those are pretty pictures. Now, there are two types of astrology. There is the exoteric astrology, which is really about our personality. So when we read the newspapers and it says today, as a Scorpio, you're going to have this sort of a day, that's really based on a very archetypal or very typical Scorpio, for example. And it really means that you'd need to be in the center of the sign, which means that most signs are from around about the 22nd or 23rd of the preceding month. In the case of Scorpio, that would be the 22nd to the 23rd of October, going right through to the 22nd, 23rd of November. So somewhere in the middle of that would be your archetypal sun sign. Now, this is only referring to the sun sign as well. There are a lot more aspects to astrology, such as your ascendant, which is what house was on the horizon when you were born. That has a major influence on us, and also the other planets. So the sun specifically for the personality, and the moon for the subconscious. Now, the second type of astrology is esoteric astrology. So esoteric, if you're not familiar with the term, means known only to those within a specific circle of knowledge. So esoteric means a group's talking and you're outside that group, or a group is communicating. So in the sense of esoteric astrology is really talking about the astrology of the soul. And again, we look at that astrology in respect of the traversing of the soul through all of the lifetimes, and how the soul either ascends or descends to spirituality or non-spirituality. That's esoteric astrology. It is our karmic influence, as I said before, which relates to the line of fate. Now, there are 12 houses in astrology, and those 12 houses, every time you see the number 12 in numerology, you can relate that to things like the 12 apostles. There are actually 12 chakras, and 12 planets within esoteric astrology. And then next to that are the 12 signs, so the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the houses around the outside in the black, and there, as the Earth rotates, they don't move, but obviously the Earth sees those at different aspects. And then the 12 signs are the signs such as Scorpio, Sagittarius, Virgo, Leo, Libra, and so on and so on. So those are the 12 signs of the zodiac. There are 10 planets that influence these signs as well within astrology. And what's very significant about astrology is angles. So within astrology, depending on the way in which your planets are set up within your astrological chart, they may be squared to each other, or they may be in a trine or a triangle. They may be conjunct. So there are various angles relating to that. So there's the square, the conjunct. Now, the personality traits in respect of astrology are really important, and they're very, again, archetypal. So they're based basically on your sun sign. So as you see here, for example, in Scorpio, you've got I desire, Libra I balance, Virgo I analyze, Leo I will, and so on and so on. So those are relative to something else that we're going to look at, which is the elements as well, which we looked at in the first session there. And as I said in the first session, in the first workshop, people have those basic elements. So it's really relating to those basic elements. And really, my interest in astrology is in the 5 elements. So each sign is in one of the elements or has a correlation to one of the elements, and this is really your major influence of where your sun is. So in respect of the earth elements, you have Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. Fire elements, Aries, Sagittarius, and Leo. The water signs, Pisces, Scorpio, and Cancer. And finally, your air signs. So you've got Aquarius, Libra, and Gemini. So there again are those archetypal, how would you say, expressions. So expressions through different elements, the 4 different elements. And the 5th is actually ether. So the 5th encapsulates all of that. In Japanese, they call it ku, which really means the void, but of course the void is empty. Another translation to that is the sky and everything that fits into that sky. Now there's also modalities relating to your astrological makeup, and these modalities are the cardinal cross, and that's crossed in this way, your fixed cross, and finally your mutable cross. So the idea behind these modalities is that, for example, the cardinal cross is for the signs that are just moving into a new phase. So they're the inception of a new phase. The fixed cross is where they are actually at the center, as I said, the archetypal. So they are within that phase. So it may be a growth phase. So you can imagine it like you have the summer, the winter, the autumn, and the spring equinoxes. They would be your fixed sort of signs, whereas the beginning of summer and the beginning of winter would be in your cardinals. Phasing out of that, as you're transitioning from one season to another, it would actually be the mutable. So it's changeable. Mutable means to change in a certain aspect. Now, there is an interesting correlation in the Bible, and I'm not again going to preach to you about the Bible, but this idea of the 3 crosses is very symbolic of the 3 modalities, the 3 crosses. So you have at the very so you have obviously Jesus in the middle. So Jesus is fixed. He's solid. He's firm. He's resolute in his beliefs, and he's staunch. He's upright. So he's on the fixed cross. On the left-hand side, you have the cardinal. So the cardinal is the new initiate who's coming in, who's stolen. They're related to as a thief. So he's that thief that is still yet to learn his ways and is unchangeable. So that's the coming in. That's the cardinal. The fixed, of course, Jesus. And on the other side, you've got the mutable. So this is the thief who's learned something and is repenting. So they realize they've done something wrong and they're trying to fix the errors of their ways. So that's interesting symbology there. Now, within the elementals, there are what I call modus operandi. So I'm going to use the example of martial arts here, and what you might find interesting is, obviously I'm a lot younger there, is the idea of receptive earth, as in receiving. So in this case here, these are actually what we call our postures. Now these relate very closely to what we're going to look at later on when we look at manifestation and magic, is in runic forms, like you would call them the stoda. So they are actually the stance or the forms. A smaller version of this would be the mudra, and the mudra would be the different hand captures that we do. So the form, if you like. The next one's fire. That's offensive. So again, if you look at the way in which we did the element for fire when we were doing the breathing for the elements, you see the triangle there and the cross. And the cross is also representative of protection. So warding off, remember I said in fire that it's about pushing away something. So in this case here, it's pushing away bad spirits. You'd normally put a cross up. If you're going somewhere to protect yourself or hold a crucifix up. Water is defensive, so it's actually like a wave, so it's moving back to gather perspective. And in this case here, that this is really saying move back because I'm threatening the person with this type of if you keep coming forward, I'm going to have to deliver it back to you. So that's that sort of defensive feeling. Air is evasive, so these are like air can't be touched, so it's really about avoiding the attack at all costs, or avoiding something at all costs. Now, to put this into more of a modern day concept, and I use the example, and I've always have for a long time, the Kirby vacuum cleaner scenario. So if you've ever had the how would you say, the luxury or the bemusement of a Kirby vacuum cleaner salesman, then you'll understand what I'm talking about. Otherwise, basically, this is a very expensive vacuum cleaner, $3,500 worth, and the way in which they come in and try and deliver stuff to you is pretty intrusive. Sometimes they use deception. So in the sense of that, if you were to use these elemental MOs consciously, or even unconsciously, if you were to receive or in that receptive mode, that earth mode, you would purchase the vacuum cleaner. You would just buy it. So in that case there, you're receiving it. So they've come in, they've talked you into it, and you've just received it. If maybe you're a little bit more standoffish, you might notice someone coming through your gate and they're carrying a Kirby vacuum cleaner. They're going to try and sell it to you, and you want to reject it. So you want to blow them away, blow that intention away, if you like. So you'd lean out the front door and say, get the hell out of here. I don't want any of that. I know what you're trying to do. So that would be more of a rejection type mode. If you're defensive, they'd come to the door, they'd present all the details. You'd say, hang on, I'm going to go away like a wave. I'm going to get my Dyson documentation, come back, and let's compare notes. So you're being defensive. You're preparing a defense, just like a lawyer goes away, prepares a defense, and then comes back with a case, normally in a case. So that would be in a defensive mode. If you're in an evasive mode, it would be like you see them coming, you duck down, you go out the back and pretend you're hanging out the watching. So when they knock on the door, it's like there's nobody there. So you've totally evaded. Now, when you have a interaction with another person, you are in one of these four modes. So you're either defensive, you're offensive, you're receptive, or you're evasive. And that's reflected in your body language, and that's really what these postures are as well. Now, in a more significant way, within our martial art, and within, you could say it's a form of shamanism or a form of magic, we have what are called kamae, which is these stances and postures. And these postures relate even more deeply in the esoteric side of astrology to different elemental signs. So you're forming those signs, such as this one, which is Sagittarius, which is fire. It's a fire sign. Receptive, which is Taurus the bull, and you can see the horns up there. Maybe Scorpio for defensive, which is a water sign, and it's emulating the constellation of Scorpius. Or Libra, where you're evading. So you're an air sign, so you're actually evading, in this case, the Kirby vacuum cleaner salesman. Obviously, I wouldn't stand in these kamae, but I may exude that attitude to help me to achieve a certain desire. Now, in the first exercise of the workshops, we actually went through bringing in each of these elements, and this is another way to bring them in. And as I say, it relates to things like runic magic. Okay, now I talked before about the egoic causal shell. So what is the ego? Essentially, it's the personality that we project. So the personality in respect of the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive, even down to the sunglasses that can reflect our eyes and the way in which we want to look. So, sometimes people want to look more aggressive. They wear the wraparound sunglasses. People who want maybe to look a bit more intelligent might wear the wide rim sunglasses. Speaking of sunglasses, I always had a giggle when I first went to Australia back in the 80s. White rim sunglasses were all in vogue, and it was quite funny because you'd see these people wearing these sunglasses in nightclubs at night, and during the day when they lifted them up, there was sort of like not much home. And no offense to anyone who might have been wearing them or got into that particular fashion thing, but yeah, there were thick-rimmed, white-rimmed sunglasses. Quite funny. So that's the personality, the ego. It's a projection that you make of yourself. In Japanese culture, if you were to ask, how do you define intent? Intent's broken down into two different parts. So you have what's called tatame. Now, tatame is actually the personality or the presentation of the ego. So it's there to a false image, if you like. Underneath that, they have another level or another layer called hone. Now, hone actually reflects to the inner self and the true self. So those two different things within the personality, and we look at that as we go along. So that's the egoic causal shell. And and I should say before we move on, the egoic causal shell is representative of that circle in the Philosopher's Stone, and it's a defense mechanism and a protection mechanism. So just like the shell around the egg of a chicken or a bird, it's designed to protect the bird or a chrysalis until the bird's evolved enough that it can come out of the shell and fly by itself. The saying in some of the Pink Floyd albums and a song, "Learning to Fly." It's about that coming out, discarding it. Now, what I should say is a lot of spiritual practices say that we should totally get rid of the ego. That's not necessarily the best thing to do because you just become a non-personality. You just become a blank slate, and there's no expression there. Personality is very essential for expression of the emotions and expression of the body language, and it's really something that you wear and that you can put on to achieve certain things as well. So, if you, in a metaphor type sense, if you're going for a job, you'd put on a business suit. If you're going for a job in a business, if you're going for a job as a rubbishman, well, you wouldn't really care. You just wear a t-shirt and a pair of gumboots. So you need the personality to help reflect and play that part. It's a bit like an actor needs a part to play. Now, another thing in respect to the ego is the three minds. So at the top of the iceberg, out of the water, we've got the conscious mind. That's really, a lot of people only have a small degree of consciousness. And what do we call consciousness now? Scientists have tried to define what consciousness is. And, I'm doing pretty well if I can define it over and above all these great academic minds. Essentially, what consciousness is an awareness of yourself and your environment. As far as I'm concerned, that's my humble opinion. So the way in which you are part of the environment and how you fit into that environment is really about that idea of consciousness. So if you have very narrow focus and a very narrow mind, you have very narrow consciousness. So in the worst case, you have what's called the denial of various things. So you might say to someone, "What do you think of astrology?" "Oh, you don't believe in that crap." "Have you ever looked into it?" "Nah, it's all crap." That really is the denial of anything. So that's really narrow-mindedness. Whereas what you want is actually at least to be open-minded enough to look into it. So the ultimate goal is not only to see things within a small degree, i.e., as in like 1 or 2% of view, but actually to try and get that 360-degree view of everything. So the next one down is the subconscious. So the subconscious is our programming. It's the way in which we put all of our feelings, all of our triggers, all of our past experiences. They all live in the subconscious. And of course, in respect of hypnotherapy, for example, you would delve down into the subconscious. Okay, so this is really important. Okay, so the next one down is the unconscious mind. So the unconscious mind actually controls our body. It controls all the involuntary functions of the body, the way the heart beats, our metabolism, all those sorts of things. But also, the unconscious mind is actually the superconscious mind as well. So this is where our deep-seated programming and any changes that we want to make within our psychic being would be done in that superconscious, which is really your higher conscious. So even though it's showing as the bottom of the iceberg, It's actually the highest part of our conscious mind, and that is really where the rubber meets the road, really where we can have the most influence, the greatest influence around us and on people around us. So that's the unconscious mind. So that's the three minds as such. Now, the conscious mind relates to what the public see. It relates to the sun. The private or subconscious relates to our three minds in respect of we have a public and a private mind, and that relates to the moon. And our superconscious or our unconscious relates to the soul, and it's really our secret mind. It's so you can think of it like public is the things we share with everyone around us, our work colleagues, our friends, our family, what we throw on Facebook. That's sort of a public thing. Our private is really our things that we only tell our closest friends, for whatever reason, because we don't want to expose too much weakness. Whereas secret is really something that we really keep to ourselves. Sometimes we don't even tell our closest confidants, confidants. So there are those three different levels of mind as well, relating to that model there. Now Plato came up with an allegory of the cave analogy for this. So what Carl Jung later on referred to as the cave was actually where sitting down at the base of the cave, you've got people chained to the wall of the cave looking up, and all they can see is a shadow. So in some senses, it's sort of like an illusion. So it's been projected from above them, and they only see the two dimensions there. It's a bit like watching a television or the way we have two-dimensional communication these days, where we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So we can only guess, and we're only seeing that interaction on a 2-degree level, unless we really start to know more about what's going on. So that's projected by the fire. So ultimately, in that allegory, what we're trying to achieve is to break free of the way in which we perceive the world, not just in that two-dimensional way of looking at things. So the allegory of the cave is really about going towards the light, going out of the door and actually seeing the reality. And we talked about looking behind the veil. That's another analogy based on the same concept. Now, I talked also before about the difference between perception and perspective. Most people live in a perception of reality type life where to them perception is reality. Now, what that means is that they really haven't got a lot of information behind a lot of things. And this is very prevalent in the new age or the latest age of the internet, where people just take one story on the internet and they believe it's fact. So they don't look any further into it. Now, this here, one of my studies is into the Mikyo, which is ancient Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, or esoteric Buddhism, and they have two mandalas, and it really describes these two different perspectives really well. So, in essence, this is the Taisokai, and what it means is that you're looking from the inside out. So, in other words, you're the actor of your own movie. Everything is revolving around you in a selfish sort of sense, if you like to go down that road, and you're just seeing one perspective of everything, or one perception of everything. So that's inside looking out. Now the other way is from the Mikyo is Kongokai, which is the outside looking in. So that really is about you're standing on the outside, and you may look at it from whatever it is. You look at a tree from one perspective, and you get that perspective here, and then you might change. Now there's an interesting Zen story about this group of villagers that are working in a couple of rice paddies separated by a road. And they're working away, and then one of them happens to look up and they see this monk walking down the road in these amazing robes, and he's just in his own space and he's just walking. And other people notice this monk as well. And when they actually go back to the village after working in the rice paddies, one of the people says, "Hey, that was interesting, that monk that walked past." And one of the people who was on the other side of the rice paddy said, "Yeah, it was an amazing red hat that he was wearing. It was beautiful." And the first monk said, "Well, no, it wasn't." Sorry, the first person said, "It wasn't a red hat, it was a blue hat." And no, the other one was adamant it was a red hat. And then other people started backing them and saying, "Well, actually, no, it was a red hat." And then the other group is saying it's a blue hat. And it ended up, not only did they disagree, but they got into a big argument, and they ended up dividing the whole village. And then what they didn't realize is that the monk actually was walking down the road. He had a hat with a blue side and a red side. And so they were lacking perspective. So if they'd actually had respect for each other, they would have realized that each person saw a different aspect of it. And if they believed in each other, they wouldn't have come to blows or wouldn't have had this parting of the ways. So that's where the perspective is really important. And this is what I say about confirming things that you see, especially on the internet. Look at things from different sources. Reliable sources too is really important. Don't just take the word of someone who's watched one video and then thinks they're an expert. Now, I'm a case in point. Don't believe everything I'm projecting to you, because this is only one perspective. Go off and do your own study on all these topics within this presentation and see what you find as well. And then formulate your own perspective from that. So that's really important. Now, here's an interesting idea of perspective as well. So this was given as an example on one of the lessons I was listening to, where in a Western society, we might say, draw us a picture of two ladies in a. So with the idea of the girls in the glen picking flowers, in the case of Western art, you notice that they're in the foreground. So effectively, as a metaphor, you could say that in Western society, we're more above nature and we're more prevalent in nature, as opposed to, say, a Dale was drawing, where you've actually got someone having a cup of tea in a nature scene. And funnily enough, you really struggle to see the humans within there, because they're a part of nature. And in fact, in a spiritual sense, if you ask someone from Japan to explain God, they would refer to nature and kami and the spirits, and nature is a reflection of God. So in this case here, you can just see on your left-hand side there these people having a cup of tea in a little hut. So they're certainly not prevalent in there. So it's interesting, those two different perspectives. Now, one of the other things in respect of looking at the circle is this idea of the makeup of things and the atomic makeup of things. And here's the 14th Dalai Lama, and he's talking about the universe is a single atom. So what does he mean by that? And the convergence of science and spirituality. What's really important is when physics and metaphysics actually converge and they complement each other rather than being at opposite ends. And the key thing here is actually the idea behind the atom, because the atom makes up everything. It's the construct that makes up everything in the world. And so we have this old world view of the atom, and it's something that doesn't sit very well with me when you look at the idea that the everything in nature is in equilibrium. So in the sense here, you've got in the nucleus the proton and the neutron, and it's like, well, how can that be where you've got two components here and you've got one component spinning around the outside and they don't meet? There's no connection here. There's no there's no connection. There's no contact between the electron and the proton and the neutron, or the nucleus. Just doesn't make sense, really. So you've got those three elements. Now here's some facts about the atom in essence that you might be able to read there. But if essentially, and I can't really read it there, but I'll leave it to you to read because I'm my presentation. But essentially, it's giving you some facts around the atom, but at a very, how would you say, subatomic level, or even atomic level, or atom level. When you look at something like lead and gold, in the atomic numbers of lead, you've got 82 protons, 82 electrons, whereas in gold, you've got 79 protons and 79 electrons. What's really amazing about that and anything else is just the different number of electrons and protons that makes up different constructs. And that's all it is. The only thing that differentiates this pen from this orange is the number of electrons and protons within each of these particles. So in an alchemic sense, where an alchemist is trying to transmute lead into gold, and I know it sounds easy, and obviously there's a process for it, all they need to do is actually remove, in the case of turning lead into gold, 3 electrons and 3 protons. That's all. And then they have gold. Which is sort of a bit laughable when you think, well, what's the big fuss over gold? You know, if it's only made up of electrons and protons, then why is it so significant? Now, I will say that, just digressing a little bit, the significance of gold is very significant in its characteristics and qualities. It's highly conductive. When you look at some of the ancients, how they prolonged their life and existence, they used a thing called monatomic gold. And I'm not going to go into that at all, but just be aware that gold has always been highly sought after. Saying that, though, all that glitters is not gold. Now, the other thing that's really significant about an atom is it's 99.9999999% empty space. So in this example here, if you were to take all of the atoms and all of the humans on the planet, that's 7 or 8 billion of human beings, and you were to take out all the empty space between the atoms, you would be able to fit all of those components, the electron, proton, neutron, into a sugar cube, something the size of a sugar cube. Everything else is just empty space. So essentially, even though our bodies have got all these atoms, we are actually 99.999% not here, which is pretty mind-blowing in itself, I suppose, when you think about it. So the idea of the atom is still to scientists, and they still haven't come to a conclusion about what the atom actually is and how it works. And you know, they've gone out and built these big hadron collider in Switzerland and 3 different countries to try and blast an atom apart, so they can try and figure out what's inside each of the components and how it actually all fits together. So yeah, they still don't know exactly what the atom is. Now, I'm going to digress again, but I'm not, in the sense that here is my idea of what I believe the construct of the atom is. Now, when we look at the yin-yang symbol, it's a very old symbol, it's very ancient, so it goes right back to the 14th century BCE, even further back than that. And although if you asked most people what the yin-yang symbol was, if they're aware of it, they would say, well, it represents duality. It represents the black and the white, all the different dualities, hot and cold, black and white, form and non-form, if you like to go down that particular aspect. But one thing that I always struggle with is this is a 2-dimensional representation of the atom, right? So what would that be to extrapolate that into a 3rd dimension or 3-dimensional? So just looking at that black spot and imagining how that would actually, the small black bit would actually evolve into the bigger black part of the atom, of the yin-yang, and how the white bit would evolve into that. And then you've got this idea of, well, how would that fit together? How would they not cross each other? And I used to do 3D modeling, and I couldn't even fathom how to attempt to actually do this, because it's just really a bit of a play on the mind. So thinking about it in 2D or 3D. So I'm just going to, before I play this, I'm just going to do a little example here, and I hope you can see it well. So this is an orange, obviously. So what I'm going to draw on here is the yin-yang. So starting at the top, coming out and around and down, and then in here. Okay, so when you look at this, here, I hope you can see it. You've got the top, you've got the bottom, and you've got a spiral that goes around the outside. Now, you could think of this like we mentioned before about being a torus. Okay, so if you think of the yin-yang in this way, where if you're looking at this is the top, this is the black and this is the white. Okay, so looking through it and slicing it through there, you'd see the S through here, and you'd see the white up here and the black down here. Now, if we look at the idea that Hermes Trismegistus, the law of correspondence, is that as above, so below. One thing that a lot of physicists are coming to the conclusion is that an atom has the same behavior as a black hole. So at the center of our universe, we've got Sagittarius A, and that's a black hole. What they have said is that they still don't know this idea of various things such as dark matter, what happens in the center of a black hole, how all light and information disappears into it, how we started from the Big Bang, from a singularity, and we spread out into duality and the whole universe and all that sort of thing, and we're still expanding out in a spiral, which is part of the aspect of nature. So the idea that the yin-yang could be related to the atom makes a lot more sense, because for one, you do have a part where the electron comes into the center. It spins around the outside in the toroidal field, comes into the center. Right at the center is the neutron, or the nucleus. So the nucleus of the atom, which is a neutron, which is a neutral particle. Now, physicists have said that what happens at the center of a black hole is electrons change into protons. And they don't quite understand how that works. But basically what it does, if you think of the electron as then changing to a proton, coming out the other side, spinning around, and then doing exactly the same thing as we get on the orange. So it's coming out, it's coming around, and then spinning back into the top. So it's got this continual spinning going in and coming out, going in and coming out. Now, if you look at the three forces in nature, which I think we talk about a little bit later on, but I'll just show you what I mean here. So the blue could be considered the electron, and the red is the proton, sorry. And you can see it spinning out and spinning back in, and it's coming through the center. But what's actually happening at the center, what I believe in the middle of a real atom, is actually, I'll just pause that for a second. There's the S of the yin yang, and the center is, if you imagine, if we were to go back a little bit, maybe to about here, where we see the top and the bottom, right here, that's the black part and that's the white part. Okay, so bear with me. So what's actually happening is the electrons coming in, which is, there are three forces in nature: electric, magnetic, and electromagnetic. Everything has a form and a field. So the field is invisible. It's the aura around the outside of something physical. And the form is obviously the physical form. So the form is magnetic. The field is electric. We can't see electricity. So they relate to the electron and the proton. So what actually happens is the visible electron comes into the center. It then changes, and they have a term for this in physics called thermodynamic entropy, where it actually changes, like in the center of a black hole, to a proton, comes out, and it's visible, magnetic, so we can see it, just as we can see this, and it's got the field around the outside we can't see. So that is the flux between the electron and the proton, the visible and the invisible, which is electromagnetic force, comes into the center, which is the field, which is the neutron. Now, what's really significant here also is that we have across this way through the center, which is across, and I'll get to that, is what we would call the event horizon. So that's the cross going one way. There is also a downward as the energy is coming down through the middle of that spiral, which is called the axis mundi. So it's a line that comes through the center of something. And so you have this cross. So religion knows all about this. And this is why the cross is such an important symbol within Christianity and with other cultures, because it's essentially the atom. Now, these forces are also on the planet are horizontal and vertical forces. So when you're protecting yourself with a cross, you're actually dividing into this particular field. Okay, so, and that's your protection. Cross my heart. The heart is a Taurus. You're crossing the heart. In, for example, in the magic that the Japanese got from Tibet, they use a grid system, which is horizontal and vertical lines, 9 of them, called the Kujikuri, and it's cutting through the time-space continuum. Now, I won't get too deep into this, but effectively what I'm saying is that this is more of a true representation of the atom. Now, as it's spinning through, there are two forces involved here. There is centrifugal and centripetal. So as it's coming out, it's spinning out and it's maintaining, it's like a pedal, centripetal. And then as it's coming in, it's spinning outwards, it's a centrifugal or centrifugal, depending on which country you come from. And it's going around, coming in, changing, and then coming out again. Now, to me, that makes more sense in regard to the model of the atom, and it explains a lot of things. It also leads into the idea of manifestation, in the sense that Hermes Trismegistus' first law was that all is mind, all is mental. So all is a field. Everything starts as a thought, as a field. Once you've created that thought in your mind, that visualization, through a process that we're going to work our way through, you then bring that into form. Okay, so that becomes the field, and out of that comes the form. So you change the field, you change the form. It's actually one of the basic principles of magic. Okay, now in here we actually have the idea of the atom, and I talked about the three forces. Now don't worry too much about the graphic here. And you have the field, you have the form, as I just said before, and that creates a torus or a toroidal field. Okay, so the last part of this particular workshop is looking at the idea of flow. So this is the flow of energy. This is the flow of the form into the field, or the field into the form. And to understand this, we first of all have got to look at our makeup to be able to embody this. And in this case here, our energy makeup. So our energy makeup in our fields is actually, first of all, our chakra system. So our chakra system, we have 7 chakras. So at the very base, we have our base chakra, represented by the square, and you can see on the left-hand side the different symbols. The second one is our sacral chakra. That's represented by the half moon. The next one is the downwards facing triangle. That's the solar plexus. That's the yellow. The next one up is the heart chakra. Now, that is actually in the form of a Merkaba, and a Merkaba is a soul travel vehicle. It's also the Star of David, and that relates to the Hebrews and the practices of the Kabbalah. So we'll get into that later. Then you've got the throat chakra, which is the blue. You've got the third eye chakra, which is the indigo. And then at the top, you've got the crown chakra, which is the 1,000-petal lotus, which is actually the violet. Okay, so the symbolism around this, and when we do the exercise, we're going to also use these symbols, so or these words, I should say, and the symbols. So starting at the very base chakra and forming the square at the base and visualizing the red and the square, we use the symbol Lam. Now, I'll start with a common one that a lot of people use a lot, and that's Om. Okay, now it's not just Om. Om is actually also AUM. It's also Amen. So it's a sealing of a prayer, And what you do when you chant Om is it's going from the outside, internalizing. It's like the atom. So it goes out, the electron goes out, comes back into the center. And as it comes back into the center, we make that sound by expressing it first of all outwardly and then internalizing it. So we shift our tongue to the roof of our mouth and we do the second part of it. So in this case here, it's Om. So you hear the change from going from the external to the internal. So you'll feel the whole body vibrating when you do these syllables, okay? And you're doing the square to start with, so lam, lam. Next one, you're forming the half moon, and this is at the sacral chakra, just by the genitals. So that's vam. Next one is a downward facing triangle with the palms facing inwards. This is at solar plexus below the sternum. And this is a yellow color. Ram. Next one is here. So this is the downward facing or the upward facing triangle, and there's an invisible downward facing triangle at the same time that you're visualizing. It's the color green, and this is yam. You can remember this by the Y and the A. So the Y is up this way, the A is down this way. So it's yam. Next one is to the throat chakra. That's the color blue. Obviously, these are the colors of the rainbow if you hadn't figured that out. So yeah, we're going to blue, which is at the throat, and that's an outward facing triangle. And that is hum, as in humming. Hum. Now the next one is om. So om is a figure 8. So that is at the third eye chakra. Okay, so this is the two eyes coming into one, the sign of infinity. Om. Now the last one, although I say silence, it's actually aha. It's the aha moment that you get, which is the aha moment when the light bulb comes on that we talked about before on the 1,000-petaled lotus. And this is in the form of a diamond, and it's the color in this case here. So you think of violet, indigo. Okay, so this is violet. So this is a diamond, and it is ah. Okay, so going through those again, the square, the red, lam. And you're trying to activate and balance these chakras. Next one's the half moon. Vam. Downward facing triangle, solar plexus, yellow. Ram. Next one, green, heart chakra. Yam. Next one, blue, outward facing triangle, throat chakra. Hum. Next one, third eye chakra, figure 8. Don't worry about these fingers, it's just these fingers here. Om. That's the color indigo. Last one, color violet, diamond, crown chakra. Ah. Okay. So that's the balancing of those 7 chakras. Okay. And those symbols relating to them. So what you're using is your visualization. You're visualizing each of those areas, visualizing the symbol. So the half moon is like this. So it's drawing that half moon. And of course the inward facing triangle, that one for the Merkaba, outward facing triangle, figure 8, and diamond. Okay, so that's the first exercise. So we would do that 7 times in respect of balancing those 7 chakras, and actually just affirming that you understand the characteristics of those chakras. Now the second exercise, and we looked at this graphic once before in the first session, is actually considering the 2 nadis, or the 3 nadis actually, and how you breathe up into the third eye area. Actually, the breath is coming from the crown chakra, which is all around us. So we're breathing it up into here, and then from here, as we breathe in, we're traversing through each of the chakras. So we're going from indigo, crossing at blue, which is the throat. We're then crossing at green, which is the heart. We're crossing again at the solar plexus, which is yellow. We're crossing again at the sacral chakra, which is orange, and then finishing up at the red in our in-breath. Our out-breath is going straight up the center and enveloping us around this way. Very sort of similar to the way in which we were doing the elemental this way here, breathing in the first session. So what you're doing here is you're visualizing breathing in, so you're scooping all the air up from around, coming up into here, going up. Okay, so this is violet air you're bringing in, indigo to here, blue to here, green, yellow, orange, red, and then combining all those colors. Now, just on that, interestingly, if you take the spiritual colors of the rainbow, combine all those together, what do you get? You get pure white light. So that's all of the colors coming together, getting that pure white light, and then sending that up through the center and enveloping the body. Okay. The difference when you combine physical, so like if you had tins of paint that were actually, or color pens that were all those different colors, and you combine it, what do you get? So the physical, you get black. Spiritual, you get white. There's the essence of the yin yang, black and white. That's why it's always seen as black and white, because one is pure white light and one is pure dark. Okay, one's visible, one's invisible, because obviously pure white light is very difficult to see. Okay, so what you're doing is you're breathing in. You can just place your hands on your knees for this one, or you can, if you like, as you breathe in, you can breathe in, crossing the fingers over in the caduceus all the way down to the bottom, and then from here sending straight up white light all around the body and enveloping the body. Okay, but we'll just do the breathing exercise. So you're breathing in again, so you're breathing in, you're imagining the violet coming in, coming up the nostrils to the indigo, and then the blue, the green, yellow, orange, red, all combined together brings this brilliant white light out, which envelops the body. Okay, so again, it 7 times to do that. And this is really about understanding the flow of the energy through your metaphysical body. Remember that this goes right back to the circle being the non-physical, goes back to the astrological and all that sort of thing. So that's the next exercise that we do. Now, one thing that I'll bring up here, if you feel silly making the Om sound or any of those sounds, this is really what defines someone who is empowered, is self-empowered. We could worry about what people are thinking, which is peer pressure. And this is what stops us from achieving, is this worry about what will people think. Okay, now for me, I'm quite fortunate. I'm sitting out here in the middle of nowhere in my tea house. There's no one around. I can shout at the top of my voice and no one will even hear me. But my point is that I don't care anyway. So if you look at Buddhist monks attaining spiritual enlightenment in Tibet, they are reciting mantras, and again, they're not worried about what's around them. They're actually building up this energy that they're pumping up into this grid that surrounds the earth. So they're doing it from a high point, so they're close to God. But if you want to empower yourself, be an individual, you can't worry about what people are saying and doing. Now, the other thing that I said, I think at the beginning, was these energies that you're dealing with here are very subtle. and they're not easily perceived initially. The more you acknowledge, acknowledge that these exist in another dimension or a higher dimension, these chakra systems that you can't see, the more they become real and the more you start to feel them, the more you become attuned to them. Okay, now if you're doing these mantras and you're worrying about what the person in the next room's thinking, you're distracted, so you're losing that traction or that flow. So go out there, do the do, and I guarantee that your life, if not already, is changing. Things will change. The next session up is about the intention, and that really is where you're applying the base foundation of the square and the circle, and you're moving into the triangle, the fire element, the will, and this will be a promise to be a really interesting exercise. Again, you need to build on these. You need to understand what the square relates to. You need to understand what the circle, because again, this is symbology and this is knowledge that helps you to build and grow upon you becoming a fuller person. Okay, so when you actually do the first ones with the elements, where you're actually breathing and you're bringing in the earth element, you've got all this other stuff that's coming in as well to form that square, not just I'm doing a square. Same as in this area where we're bringing in the circle, you're thinking about things like the structure of the atom, the form of the circle, the egoic causal shell, cycles, circles, chakras, all of those things all come into play as well. So go ahead and practice. See how you go.